Well, let's just face it. We live in a managed ecosystem. The earth is a managed ecosystem. Some people don't want to admit that, but it is. And management, if you choose not to do anything in an area, if you choose to make it a wilderness area, you choose to designate it as a park, you're managing it. And landscapes, particularly where you live and where I live, are living systems.
Good, bad, and everything in between, the food we eat changes our lives and the land around us. Learn and be inspired by stories of food, people, and the land we all share as we explore how food transforms. Good morning from the Bob Hines studio at Robinette Farms. It is a beautiful spring day here. I just checked cattle. Chloe is out pulling a trailer, running some errands. Megan is in the greenhouse growing our certified organic microgreens. And the crew is busy in the warehouse. You might hear them now and then. They're packing customized orders full of local food ready to be delivered to our wonderful customers. And if you weren't aware, humans aren't the only species that need food. Other animals, plants, fungus, and whatever other forms of life I didn't properly characterize, they need food too. The food they consume changes them and the environment in which they live. And today we'll explore the plants and the wildlife in healthy ecosystems and how humans can interact in a positive way with diverse, productive, and yes, wild landscapes. And we're going to do that with an accomplished conservationist, rancher, and writer by the name of Bob Budd. Bob is the executive director of the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust, where he works to enhance wildlife habitats and the natural resources of his state. Bob grew up ranching in Wyoming, and his family is still connected to the land they first stewarded in 1879. He raised his family while managing the Nature Conservancy's Red Canyon Ranch in central Wyoming. And yes, the Nature Conservancy, an environmental organization, owns ranches. Bob worked as director of land management for the Nature Conservancy in Wyoming. And prior to that, he was the executive director of the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, a cattle industry group. Bob knows ag business from his bachelor's degree and years in ranch management. And he knows ecology from his master's in range management and all those years managing grasslands. What brought Bob to my attention is a beautiful little book he wrote called Otter's Dance, A Rancher's Journey to Enlightenment and Stewardship, which is about ranching, wildlife, and our relationship to the earth and each other. Bob, welcome to Food Transforms.
Glad to be here, Alex.
I'm excited to have you. Really enjoyed the book, and I want to get this out of the way straight off the bat. Which is it? Are you a rancher or are you an environmentalist? Which team are you on?
Yes, I am.
It feels like there's so much negative energy in the world. You know, people want to know, what team are you on? Are you on my team? Or are you on their team? Which team are you on?
Oh, yeah.
And social media is mostly hurtful, demeaning language. Political and physical conflict seem kind of intractable. And we don't seem to agree on anything. And the world just feels a bit heavy. But Otter's Dance is such a breath of fresh air. In the first few pages, you really hooked me. And I'd like you to read part of that passage on page 15 of the introduction. Would you read that for me?
Sure. I once asked a very diverse group of people to stand on a hillside and write down what they would like the valley below to look like in 50 years. Despite their strongly held convictions, some diametrically opposite, their vision for the landscape of the future was identical.
That just blows my mind. How is it that people looking at that valley from, like you said, diametrically opposite perspectives can agree? How can that happen?
I think it really comes down to being in place, being outdoors, standing there and looking at it. And I repeated that experiment numerous times. We'd get groups to the ranch and take them out and and you'd ask that same question. And you know, we have a lot of political beliefs that we get in our head, but when you stand there and look at a valley in Red Canyon, it was a spectacular vista. When people drive the highway, there's an overlook, they can look down in there and ask any of them, well, what do you want this to be in 50 years? One guy might say he wants it to look just like it does because he likes cows. Another one may say they want it to look just like it does because he likes beaver. Another one may say the same thing because he just is an artist and loves the vista and the view. But at the end of the day, that separates out all the political ideology. I'm not asking a political question. I'm just asking people, what do you think this ought to look like? And I've done it in the plains, I've done it in the forests and everywhere.
People share that. They share the view, the vision, the goal.
Yeah, and their mind isn't clouded with a bunch of rot that they keep, we all get force fed this stuff. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Um, but if you're standing there, I mean, it's anything and I'm probably weird, but I drive all over the place, particularly in the West, and it's always a wonderful thing because you're looking out and seeing things and saying, wow, look at that, look at this. Drives my wife crazy, but
Otter's Dance is it's just such a passionate, authentic contribution. I really feel like you made the world a better place writing that book. Why did you write it?
well, thank you for that. I have written since I was probably in junior high. My mother was big on reading and writing. I was a little library rat kid. I mean, when I graduated from high school, I think I weighed 120 pounds, and then I gained 4 inches and 50 pounds in college. Um, I just grew late. But so I spent a lot of time in the library. I read a lot of things, and I started writing. We had a tremendous teacher in eighth grade, seventh and eighth grade that taught a creative writing class, which I was in, and she encouraged that. But it was a release for me. And then in all the jobs I've had, there have been numerous opportunities where people would ask you to come and speak and then write an essay. I've done several of those, contributed to a number of books, and some of the stuff in Otter's Dance came from that. But it was I think a mental relief. For me, it's like painting. I paint a little bit too. The creativity side of your brain gets engaged, and it's relaxing and it's good for you. If you're always, in fight mode, or if you're always in non-creative pursuits, uh, it wears you out. And so I think that's a lot of it. And then, just different things would come up. I wrote a monthly column when I was with Stock Growers for 15 years, uh, and then continued to write. A lot of the stories or the essays in Otter's Dance came from, I mean, some of them are pretty old and some of them are brand new, but they all were things that happened. And as you know, watching your kids grow up and making a decision, take a pay cut to go run a ranch that everybody thinks you're nuts. I found a notebook the other day cleaning the house out that had all of the old original clippings and stories in there. I mean, some of them are hysterical. Can this mixed marriage work and stuff like
The
that.
mixed marriage between the cattle industry and the Nature
And
Conservancy.
TNC.
Yeah.
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 In the epilogue of the book, you wrote, quote, "We argue the price of beef instead of the value of a cow as a meadow manager." Do
Yeah.
meadows in Wyoming need managing? And why should cows do it?
Well, let's just face it. We live in a managed ecosystem. The earth is a managed ecosystem. Some people don't want to admit that, but it is. And management, if you choose not to do anything in an area, if you choose to make it a wilderness area, you choose to designate it as a park, you're managing it. And landscapes, particularly where you live and where I live, are living systems. They're made up of, you start with your soil. Soil is alive. It's like the skin on our body, the largest organ that we have. And in that organism, you have, bacteria, you have small insects, you have nematodes, you have all these things that are living and contributing to that life form, and it cascades up and down and across and out. That's what we have. So if you don't care for that, another word for management is care. If you don't care for it and take care of it and pay attention to it, it's going to unravel at times. And so, yeah, it is. And we don't have a lot of tools to manage landscapes. We've got grazing animals, we have fire, technology, which is probably overutilized, and then succession, plant succession, and where you are with those and how you choose to use those tools really is a big driver in how that system responds and how much resilience is built into it.
You told a story that I heard about people coming to visit Red Canyon Ranch and not believing that the cattle could contribute positively to the land. And you told a little story about some wetlands. Will you share that?
Yeah. So again, just thinking, as an ecologist, we had riparian areas that really needed to be restored. And there were a couple things that were missing. If you look at that tool set that you have, succession was in the wrong place. And with the living organisms that manage riparian areas are beaver, and they were missing. And so what you ended up with was a system in which your grasses grew before the willows could even shoot up. They always come earlier. And you never had a chance for that willow growth to come in and restore itself. So we just sat down and said, all right, how do we fix that? Well, we used cows, a lot of them, very short duration, ran them through the riparian areas, took the grass out, the herbaceous stuff, and then got out of there. And within 2 or 3 years, we had willows 6, 8 feet high. The beaver were back into the system, and it was, the water went from running red from Red Canyon to running clear. And we did that repeatedly here, and other people have done that as well. So it's using the tools at your disposal and using them at the right time and in the right dimension. That's how you can manage those systems and restore systems.
And basically the feed for the cattle, the grasses in that area helped by managing the cattle, you helped manage the food cycle. So it became more food for beavers, which would hold water on the landscape and restore that riparian area. It's all about who was eating what and putting them in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, and that right place and right time thing is a big part of that. I did a lot of work. Fred Provenza at Utah State is a genius as far as animal behavior, and Fred and I collaborated on a number of things. But one of the things that he taught me was you have to think in terms of what is that cow looking for, and the cow in April or May, what does she want more than anything in the world is not a bale of hay. It's green, lush forage, which is grass, which is an impediment to growing willows. So you put the cows in there, they're not going to touch the willows. The willows are coming up, they're not going to touch them. They don't want something dry and stemmy like the hay they've been eating all winter. They want lush green forage. So they'd go in and mow it just like you took a mower in there, clean it out, and then you'd move them and not be in there in the hot summer when those willows needed the chance to grow and leaf out and extend their leader growth. So it's timing. It's trying to think like a cow or like their belly is telling them to think. And you can do the same thing in other seasons of the year, depending on what it is you're trying to do.
Right. Speaking of willows, I really loved the chapter, Where Will the Moose Live? And I don't want to spoil the story, but the confrontation you describe is about the government trying to help ranchers grow more people food, beef, by creating more cattle food in the form of hay. But creating more hay fields would destroy wildlife habitat. It would transform the landscape into something different, something less functional. And we always seem to be in this push-pull where we need to extract something from the land in order to get food or the resources we need or want. And to some extent, that's always true. No matter what you eat, whether you're a carnivore, or omnivore, or vegetarian, we all extract something from the planet when we eat. But I once heard a Nature Conservancy employee say, a well-managed ranch is the least extractive form of food production. Do you think that's true?
I think a well-managed ranch is probably the ideal for what we need in this country. It provides clean air, clean water, wildlife habitat, and the food is about as organic as you can get. I mean, that absolutely is true. And that's a paraphrasing of Wes Jackson, who wrote a book on sustainability out of Kansas, in which he said the same thing. And I quoted him one time, said, even a poorly managed pasture is ecological superior to a well-managed field that's been plowed. And we need plowed fields. There are places for that. But the point he made, and I said that, and a lady in the audience stood up and said, oh God, and even a badly managed ranch is better than a parking lot. And so, you look at soil permeability, you look at all those things. Yeah, that's what our optimal goal should be, is to have the system functioning in a resilient fashion so that it's able to deal with drought and flood and fire and things and come back stronger. And that's what we're really talking about.
This might be the place to try our first edition of a little piece we're calling Ask a Redneck. Here we go. We'll see if he answers.
We will see. How's that?
Ty Walker, how are you, brother?
Oh, all right. We know, man.
Well, I know that I'm recording you for a podcast, and we're doing a little bit called Ask a Redneck. And I was hoping you might share with me what Rocky Mountain oysters are.
It's bovine testicles. When you're working calves, we castrate the bulls, which means we cut their testicles out, and then you take those, and usually you bred them, although it's common tradition to just cut them and put them right on the stove there. Sometimes a lot of kids, they'll eat them right there. But more traditionally, you bread them, and it's
you fry them up. You bread them and then you fry them, or what?
yeah, usually, yep.
Yeah.
But like I said, sometimes right there at the branding, you'll take fresh ones and you'll just put them right on the stove, which is getting the branding irons hot,
Yep.
and it'll cook them. And I don't personally care for those all that much, but I've done it from time to time.
Now, if you had your choice between like well-made, breaded and fried Rocky Mountain oysters and then the ones you get at the bar down the road, which would you take?
Fresh ones are pretty good. But again, you're not breading them and stuff right there in the pasture.
Right.
I mean, no, a lot of times after the branding gets done, everybody has their meal and stuff, and then a lot of times it was kind of a tradition. The older guys would sit around and clean them and kind of visit and everything. And then, if you eat those within the next couple of days, they're usually pretty good.
I bet.
So I probably have to pick those. But I don't know, a few times a year is enough for me.
Well, I don't know what you're working on out in the Sandhills today, but I'm glad I caught you on the phone. We're going to let you get back to your day.
All right. You have a good one, man. Adios.
We are back with the conservationist and author of Otter's Dance, Bob Budd. Now, you mentioned the different places we live. I live in eastern Nebraska, which used to be entirely tall grass prairie, and which was food for wildlife primarily, and which is now all that land is almost entirely corn and soybean farms, food for livestock mostly, and not wildlife. But occasionally you see hillsides that are covered in thick, tall grasses. And this land was farmed in the past because it has bermed soil following, the contours of the land. These are obviously man-made. Mother Nature does not build contoured terraces and berms. The berms were installed to prevent soil erosion that was caused by tilling the earth and turning the grasslands into farmland. And you mentioned that we need some tilled fields, and there must be land in Wyoming that has gone from grassland to farming and back to grassland. And I'm curious, what happens to the land when it grows grasslands, food for grazing ruminants, instead of farmed crops? How does that land change when it goes back into grass?
It's hard to do that. And the Bankhead-Jones Act was one of those where people had come out and tried dryland farming. Northeastern Wyoming is blanketed with Bankhead-Jones lands that are managed by the Forest Service. And that because there wasn't a BLM at the time, that was the land office. Anyway, depending on what's happened, you've got to go back to those fundamentals. Succession has to occur again. And so, you may go through a period of a lot of weeds, a lot of other things. You may have lost your nitrogen fixing plants. You may have lost some of that. Over time, succession generally will win out and you'll move it back into a grassland. A lot of those now we're helping. You can go in with soil additives, with mixing, make sure that your topsoil has the organisms it needs to be alive. But when it transitions back, it probably will transition in different ways. And one of the ways is that if you look at, and actually I co-wrote a paper on this, you have Western wheatgrass is rhizomatous, so it grows out from the bottom. It sends stolons out and new plants come up. Blue bunch wheatgrass is a bunch grass, and so it propagates from seed and grows in a large clump. If you've had disturbance to the level of tilling the ground, your bunch grasses are probably going to go away and be replaced by your rhizomatous grasses. And when that happens, trying to go back and make it a bunch grass prairie is probably going to drive you crazy, and you probably will not succeed.
Right.
So you look at a transition to a different type of grassland. You mentioned tall grasses. That may be one of the things that I get most excited about, is that they are so utterly gorgeous. I have them growing in my yards, both here in Glendo, big blue stem, little blue stem, Indian grass. They're just stunningly gorgeous plants,
Yeah,
but they evolved with.
that's the basis of the prairie here. All those grasses you mentioned.
Yeah, and you got to look then historically, what was the interaction between those plants and your drivers in your system, which were other organisms, grazing animals, fire. Well, there was a complete and utter relationship there. The bison would come in, graze that down. That would prevent fire in some cases. Where it didn't, they'd burn, and then you'd come back. So you had this interaction between grazing, fire, and plant communities that is still out there in the Flint Hills of Kansas. That's still out there in a number of the tall grass prairies. But you can't take one of those away and make them sustainable. So you have to look at all of the historic influences that were there. And that's what we tried to do with cows, because they're easier to manage.
Right. The cows are in some ways a stand-in for the large herds of grazing ruminants, the bison that used to run the landscape.
Yeah, they're a surrogate. Yep.
And you mentioned fire. Obviously, a lot of that fire was set by humans. Native Americans were setting fire that would open up the grass and get really lush green growth that would attract bison, that were then part of their a very important part of their diet and their food. So there's another example of, even before settler communities arrived here, humans were interacting with the landscape that was still very wild and diverse.
Oh, yeah. You look back and there's some great books on it. The Natural West is a great book by Dan Flores that talks about the amount of irrigation that took place in the Colorado Basin, fires being set specifically to attract grazing animals. And if you ever look at a fire, it's the first thing that happens. The antelope, the deer are back on top of that thing right away.
Fast. Yeah, it gets real green fast. Your email signature stood out to me. It really stakes out the ground that you operate from. It's a quote from Teddy Roosevelt. It says, "Conservation means development as much as it does protection. I recognize the right and duty of this generation to develop and use the natural resources of our land, but I do not recognize the right to waste them or to rob by wasteful use the generations that come after us." How do we define wasteful in a way that enough people can agree?
I think we're getting there, Alex, with the concept of resilience, which people are talking about now more and more. And it's like any term that gets thrown out there immediately. Biodiversity once was a term. I remember going to a workshop in the 90s where it was simply to have people understand what biodiversity meant. Is captured this word, and what it meant was richness. It meant that you had all the pieces in place. But God, that word just became a lightning rod. And resilience now has, some people kind of think it's a lightning rod. I use the term a lot because what it means is that the system can respond to the challenges that are put before it. And they have responded, and they do. So you have fire, and God bless you people in Nebraska with the fires you've had. We had that 2 years ago. It's just devastating. But at the end of the day, when you look at the recovery that's occurring in Wyoming now, 2 years later, and some of the intervention that we've done to prevent invasive annual grasses like cheatgrass, it's probably going to be a good thing in the long run. When you're staring at the flames, it's not a good thing. It's not. You can't see any good in it. But
yeah, absolutely. That's hard. That was in particular the Morrill fire in western Nebraska the last few weeks was the largest in our history, and it was a big grass fire, and there is just no way to stop a grass fire that wants to burn. So it's
no, and particularly where we have invasive annuals that they're basically gasoline on the ground, and
sure.
And so I think it woke a lot of people up here to the fact that we need to be more focused on resilience in these systems, and having them grazed, having them burn occasionally, having those things happen, but doing it in a way that is more manageable than burning 1 million acres in 2 or 3 days, which is what we did.
Well, and grasslands are a disturbance-driven system. People talk about a lot that grazing, drought, fire, those are disturbances that actually did form and are a healthy part of grasslands. In the chapter Managing for Sustainability, you wrote about government sustainability projects that failed, and I was hoping you could maybe read a passage from that page on 203.
In China, maximization of both farming and logging, beginning in the 1940s and 1950s, ultimately led to the realization that watersheds were being altered so radically that they may all end up as an extension of the nation by being carried to the Pacific Ocean. The solution in many cases was issuance of a logging ban or a grazing ban or a fire ban or a combination of all three. Huge public works projects went so far as to plant trees, install drip irrigation systems, and demand compliance from people and plants alike. Most failed, not because they weren't ecologically based, but because starving people don't listen well to environmental resolution that fails to include an economic future.
That's a great last sentence, and that's why you give kids a snack before explaining instructions, right? Starving people don't listen well.
That's right.
I joke about it, but it obviously has very real consequences. Truly starving people, as you point out, aren't going to listen to sustainability ideas. In the book, you return again and again to the importance of three things: economy, ecology, and culture. Did these efforts in China, and no doubt in the US and lots of other places as well, do these efforts fail when they don't take all three of those things into account?
Yes, inevitably. And if you look back at, when we had Manifest Destiny, that was culturally and economically driven, but not ecologically sound. If you look at some of the actions that took place in the 60s, they were very ecologically driven, but they weren't culturally or economically sound. So if you don't look at the three, and it's not an equal, it's a balance. There's somewhere in there is a balance that you're seeking. I recall when I was in China, that I've been there twice for work, and looking at people that were bicycling with a bag of corn strapped on their back that weighed more than they did to deliver that.
Wow.
Those people are not going to respond to the fact that I never saw a songbird. It's because they ate them. And so you have to look at that. But I often tell the story that, just to illuminate this, of those three, it now is the most populous country in the world is India. At the time, it was not. And I said, okay, so what are your problems in India? You have water quality problems. You have ecological deserts. You have all kinds of ecological problems, and you have rampant starvation and poverty. So how do you fix that? And the answer is very simple. You just eat the cows. Except culture will not allow that to happen. So
Right.
Culture almost always is the trump card. You have to do things that fit within the culture of the people who are out there. So you can't come in and mandate to a rancher to raise Charolais cows if he doesn't like Charolais cows, for whatever reason you come up with. And it seems at times that that's how government operates, is to tell people what to do instead of enabling them to do the things that they can do well. And there's a great quote by Aldo Leopold to that effect, that all the prayers of the city cannot cause farmers to leave corn shocks in the field or leave fence rows unharvested for winter feed for the birds and all that. He said all the people of the city can do is provide incentives upon which a farmer may act. That's probably one of my favorite quotes ever done by Aldo Leopold, because it's so straight on.
Right. Yeah, we have to be able to engage with each other and agree on the importance of economy, ecology, and culture to make lasting change. I heard a frustrated biologist once ask you, this work can be so draining. How do we keep energized? And I love what you said. You said, go to bed with wonder, wake up with wonder. The rest of the day, you can work on strategy and tactics. What do you mean by wonder, and why does it matter so much?
To me, getting up in the morning and hearing a blue jay is wonder. Driving down a country road and hearing the slap of a beaver tail on a pond is wonder. seeing something you've never seen. The first time I saw tall grasses, I was wonder, and having that just sheer sense of awe is invigorating, and realizing at the end of the day, I think there's a chapter in the book where I talk about walking back from the barn at the end of the day with the kids, and the stars are still in the sky and the air's crisp. It's in the fall, you know it's going to snow soon, and just stopping and sensing all that around the things around me, and realizing that I am mortal and that I'm so fortunate to be where I'm at and have the ability to look up and see the Milky Way and smell that snow on the air. That's wonder. And if we wake up with that and we go to bed with that, the rest of the day will fall into place. But if we don't have wonder in our life, if we don't have awe, if we aren't seeking out, seeing, I mean, first time you ever saw a dung beetle rolling a turd into a little ball, I mean, that's freaking wonder. That's awesome stuff. And I took kids and I'd have them watch it, and they just sit there in absolute awe. They're enamored by this little beetle rolling a ball of poop, you know, and how do you not just get jacked about that stuff?
Bob, this has been a blast. I have a ton of respect for the work you've done, and I really appreciate you being here. I encourage everyone to get a copy of Otter's Dance, A Rancher's Journey to Enlightenment and Stewardship. And I'm hoping, Bob, you have one last little bit of wonder you can take us out with.
There is nothing like walking out your front door and hearing sandhill cranes overhead. And I looked up, and there's a whole group of them just swirling up there playing, and they're calling, and it's like, oh my God. And then I hear another one. And there's 3 groups of them over the town of Cheyenne that are just making this cacophony of noise. And sage grouse, when they're strutting, it's the sound, the show, the elements. There's just wonder around us all the time. Listen to the different vocalizations of a blue jay. I can sit there and listen to them do the pump handle, and then they'll do the call. And I walked out yesterday, there was one in the neighbor's tree across the street. He's right at the top. He's looking for some lady jay, and man, was he raising hell. He was making a racket up there, and I thought, go for it, buddy. It's spring.
Food transforms everything around us. If you like what you heard today, please subscribe, post glowing reviews, and tell your friends. Visit robinettefarms.com today for food and info. Join us next time, and remember, food is a gift. Enjoy it.